This presentation will provide information for coaches and athletes on the importance of mapping one's menstrual cycle to training volumes and intensities. Only by doing this can we maximize performance and training outcomes and minimize injury risk to our female athletes. The information presented will give female athletes the information they need to use their menstrual cycle to their advantage, to help accelerate results from training and stay safe and healthy while balancing life and training demands. It's time for all coaches to work with the female cycle in the pursuit of athletic and performance outcomes. Every female responds to her period cycle differently. Therefore, it's important to use mapping tools so we can use science to better guide our training and programming choices. Before starting this conversation with your female athletes, please remember that every woman is unique and will respond to her period cycle and the fluctuation of hormones differently. As such, I recommend that a personalized approach should be taken based on each individual's response to exercise performance across the menstrual cycle. The success of mapping any female's training with her menstrual cycle lies in having open and honest conversations about her body and her responses to training. You may wish to add open-ended questions about her cycle into the screening process. Be sure to explain the relevance of the information in a professional way. This is where the rapport that you have built, mutual respect, and trust are paramount. By having a firm understanding of how the first phase of an athlete's cycle differs from the second phase, you'll gain valuable insight into the length of her cycle, as well as the associated moods, energy fluctuations, cravings, changing body shape, and performance outcomes, all of which are influenced by hormones. Individual monitoring of the menstrual cycle phases will provide important feedback for programming, training, and expectations in competition. There are some glaring differences in male and female physiology. On average, women have a larger surface area to mass ratio, a lower bone mass, and a wider, shallower pelvis compared with men. But let's have a look at some specifics. In terms of body composition, women have more body fat and less lean muscle mass than men. Women store fat with a gynoidal distribution compared to a man's android distribution. That is, women have increased fat storage in body parts such as breasts, buttocks, and legs, but they have decreased abdominal and visceral fat. Women tend to have lower base strength. The difference in muscle strength between trained women and men is explained by muscle mass size and not differences in muscle fiber type or muscle adaptation. Women also have less testosterone than men, which is why they build muscle at a slower pace. Male skeletal muscles are more explosive and have higher maximum power output than that of female muscles. However, this difference closes with a serious amount of training in elite female athletes. Conversely, during repeated muscle contractions, female muscles are generally more fatigue resistant and recover faster. Metabolically, women have a lower resting metabolic rate. This is not related to gender per se, but to the fact that muscle mass is more metabolically active compared with fat. Women also have a lower red blood cell mass and lower hemoglobin and hematocrit compared with adult men. That is, the transport of oxygen from the lungs to the tissues and the delivery of metabolically produced carbon dioxide to the lungs for expiration is 12% lower in women. The differences in body size, composition, blood volume, and hemoglobin content results in a lower VO2 max in female athletes of around 20%. The menstrual cycle is the result of a complex series of hormonal changes involving the hypothalamus, the pituitary glands, and the ovaries. Female athletes are often concerned regarding the number of days of menstruation and the volume of menstrual flow. A normal cycle is often described as being on average 28 days in length, but in reality, a 28-day cycle occurs in only 12.5% of all cycles. Studies on the length of regular menses have shown variations in the length of normal as ranging from 21 to 35 days. Menstrual duration also varies considerably, with normal flow lasting for an average of 2 to 8 days. For these reasons, female athletes should be encouraged to track their cycles so that an understanding of what their individual normal cycle looks like. There are many apps available to assist them to do this. The follicular phase starts on the first day of menstruation and it ends with ovulation. Prompted by the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland releases follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH. This hormone stimulates the ovary to produce around 5 to 20 follicles. The developing follicles cause a rise in the level of estrogen. The growth of the follicles stimulates the lining of the uterus to thicken in preparation for a possible pregnancy. The ovulation is the release of the mature egg from the surface of the ovary, and this occurs mid-cycle around days 12 to 17. After ovulation occurs during the luteal phase of the cycle, progesterone exceeds estrogen as the uterus is prepared for a potential pregnancy. If a pregnancy does not occur, then there will be a drop in progesterone levels, causing the lining of the uterus to fall away. This is known as menstruation, and we're now back in the follicular phase and the cycle repeats. The two main hormones to be aware of during the menstrual cycle are estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen is anabolic in nature. That means in respect to training there may be increases in muscle mass and strength, an increased speed of muscle regeneration, and positive bone density outcomes. Estrogen also creates an increased sensitivity to exercise and protection against muscle damage. Estrogen increases the collagen content of connective tissues, tendons, and ligaments, but it decreases stiffness of tendons and ligaments, especially during menstruation. This decreased stiffness of tendons gives women a much lower predisposition to muscle strains. Estrogen also has anti-inflammatory properties, which aids in faster recovery times from intense exercise. Estrogen accelerates metabolism and enhances the use of fat while sparing glycogen. This is important for endurance athletes because your ability to run for long periods is influenced by the amount of glycogen in your muscles. By sparing the amount used and relying more on fat for energy, fatigue is delayed and endurance is improved. The message is, when estrogen is elevated, train harder for longer and you'll recover faster than when estrogen is low. Progesterone is catabolic in nature. Protein catabolism is the breakdown of muscles and other protein stores for cellular processes. This has been shown to peak with higher progesterone levels, thus increasing protein needs during this part of a woman's cycle. Female athletes training when progesterone is high will reach a higher heart rate more quickly, especially when training in warmer temperatures. The onset of fatigue for the same intensity of training is felt more rapidly in the luteal phase than in the follicular phase. Elevated progesterone levels create a drop in plasma volume, which can compromise the amount of oxygen delivered to the muscles. This drop reduces sweat rate, and since sweat helps the body cool down, it can also result in an increase in body temperature. When progesterone is elevated, there will be energy shifts, mood changes, and a compromised ability to recover from training. Research also demonstrates a tendency toward increased emotional eating during this hormonal flux. The message is, train with moderate to low loads, beware of mental fogginess and the increased injury risk. And coaches allow for sensitivity in training with changing moods. How do we maximize training through the menstrual cycle? In days 3 to 14, there is an increased estrogen and testosterone, which we said are anabolic hormones. These hormones help to build muscle faster and delay the onset of fatigue in training sessions. During this time, females will maintain an average body temperature. So, during these 2 weeks, there is an increased pain tolerance, and athletes can generate more force from the muscles. So, strength and power training should be high on the to do list. Female athletes also have increased endurance during this time. Increased insulin sensitivity means that they are more effective in taking up blood glucose, and they'll store more glycogen within the muscle ready to use. Less strain is experienced through training. There's reduced DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness. This means a decreased recovery time between sessions, so they can do a higher volume of training. The focus in this time is to train hard and get gains. That is, get in the gym and lift heavy, knowing that recovery from loads are more effective than in the latter half of the month. Female athletes are also mentally sharp during this time, and let's face it, there is never a downside to being focused, alert, and being able to recall information. All right, days 12 to 17, this is the ovulation window. At this point, estrogen and testosterone are at their peak, but progesterone, the catabolic hormone, is on the rise. This brings with it an increase in body temperature. These 5 days are when our athletes are at a higher risk of injury. We'll delve into ACL injury risk in the next slide, but ligament and tendon injuries are highest during ovulation. And this is due to the peak in the estrogen hormone, which impacts the laxity of the joint structures. There should be an onus of responsibility on athletes during this time to be aware of joint vulnerability. Understand that there will be a higher level of fatigue building. An increased metabolism is positive, but it comes with a decreased insulin sensitivity. The uptake and storage of glucose and glycogen is not as efficient as it was in the follicular phase. This negatively impacts the onset of fatigue in training. Lastly, it's important for athletes to eat a balanced diet during this time and ward off cravings, as there is a tendency to store more fat during this ovulation window. Anterior cruciate ligament injury rates are 4 to 8 times higher in women than in men. Because of estrogen's direct effect on collagen metabolism and behavior, and because neuromuscular performance varies during the menstrual cycle, it's logical to question the menstrual cycle's effect on knee injury rates. A significant statistical association was found between the stage of the menstrual cycle and the likelihood for an anterior cruciate ligament injury. These findings suggest that sex hormones might play a role in the incidence of female non-contact ACL injuries. Days 15 to 28, the last 2 weeks of the cycle, require attention to detail in what we do and how we do it. Estrogen has dropped and progesterone is high. Training during this phase requires more effort at the same intensities than in the first 2 weeks of the cycle. Be aware that athletes' RPEs, or rate of perceived exertion, will rise. Everything feels harder. There's decreased muscle glycogen use, which makes high-intensity efforts like sprints and jumps feel more difficult. And serotonin production is low. This is important to discuss, as with this comes more volatile emotions, moods may be erratic, and athletes may be more sensitive to feedback given by coaches. Serotonin is the key hormone that stabilizes mood, gives feelings of well-being and happiness. So athletes need to be educated on how their hormones affect them physically and emotionally. Serotonin allows brain cells and other nerve system cells to communicate. And because serotonin is low, reaction times may be off and athletes may be mentally foggy. They may not make their best decisions and they may need instructions given more than once. It's important to be an understanding and compassionate leader. This is the time to deload your athletes with low volume sessions. It's important to build monthly training cycles to match an individual athlete cycle. In weeks 1 and 2, athletes can handle high loads and high intensities of training. Week 3 of the cycle should consist of moderate volumes, tapering down to low volumes in week 4. That is, use the first 2 weeks during the follicular phase to get a lot of work done and maximize gains. Then gradually taper training expectations in the last second half of the cycle, the luteal phase. Here is one example of how this may be done, where a team training is held 3 times a week and gym sessions are broken into upper body and lower body efforts, plus total body fusion sessions. This slide is simply a copy of the PDF handout that I've provided with the presentation. You can use this with your athletes to start the conversation and provide a summary of the educational points. Thanks for taking the time to listen, and I wish you and your athletes the very best in the upcoming season and beyond.